Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Tuesday, July the 12th, 2022. Let's talk about a strutting popinjay called Vladimir Zelensky. It's a very amusing story, at least it amused me. This is from Richard Raycraft at CBC News. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky is blasting the Canadian government over its decision to return to Germany natural gas turbines caught up in sanctions imposed on Russia, calling the move absolutely unacceptable and warning that Moscow will see it as a sign of weakness. Oh, it's absolutely unacceptable. So, what is Zelensky going to do? Is he going to stop accepting the billions of dollars that Canada has and will pour into his rat hole in the Ukraine? Boy, that's what they call chutzpah. Natural Resources Minister Jonathan Wilkinson announced Saturday that the turbines will be making their way back to Germany after the Canadian government allowed what he called a time-limited and revocable exemption to its current sanctions on Russia. The move came as Canada imposed new sanctions on Russian agents and entities in response to its invasion of the Ukraine. What's the Canadian government going to do next? Is it going to impose sanctions on everyone in Canada with Russian names, perhaps? But Zelensky wasn't pleased with the decision. If a terrorist state can squeeze out such an exception to sanctions, what exceptions will it want tomorrow or the day after tomorrow? This question is very dangerous, Zelensky said in his nightly address on Monday. Terrorist state, huh? Well, it's the Ukraine who are packing civilians into buildings, which they then put military installations in. That's called use of human shields, and I believe it's considered a war crime. Zelensky considered, moreover, it is dangerous not only for Ukraine, but also for all countries of the democratic world. Zelensky called on the Canadian government to reverse the decision. Of course, this decision on one turbine, which leads to many other problems, can still be revised. Russia has never played by the rules in the energy sector, and it will not play now unless it sees strength. In an interview with CBC's Power and Politics, Ukraine's ambassador to Canada, Yulia Kovalev, said Ukraine will continue to discuss the issue with the Canadian government in the coming weeks. We do appreciate a lot of support that the Canadian government provided to Ukraine in different spheres, and we still hope that this decision will be revoked, she said. Kovalev said revenue from the pipeline will contribute to the bloodshed in Ukraine. Russia is using energy as a weapon in Europe and all over the world, Kovalev said. This money and fuel are going to support the war in Ukraine. We need to hold united, all together, to maintain this unity in the sanctions and not waver in them. Wilkinson said the decision was necessary and that German livelihoods are at risk. In prepared remarks Monday, he said Russia's war on Ukraine and the resulting geopolitical tensions have shown how vulnerable Europe is on the energy front. This is not just a matter of inconvenience or even a crunch with respect to affordability and pocketbooks. This is a fundamental threat to their ability to provide the basics for their citizens, from heat for their homes to fuel to transport food and goods, and power to sustain their industries, their jobs, and their economies. Absent a supply of natural gas, the German economy will suffer very significant hardship, and Germans themselves will be at risk of being unable to heat their homes as winter approaches. In a related story, this is from Reuters 5 days ago by Steve Scherer and Rod Nickel. Canada's Ukrainian community is urging Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to refuse to compromise the country's sanctions against Russia in order to return a turbine that Moscow says is critical for supplying natural gas to Germany. Canada has one of the world's biggest Ukrainian diasporas outside of countries that border Ukraine, and it has successfully pressured Ottawa to impose increasingly strict sanctions against Russia since it invaded Ukraine in February. Oh, That's all that Canada needs. Another fifth column within our borders. Ukrainian Canadian Congress, UCC National President Alexandra, and I can't pronounce that final name, urged Trudeau in a letter Wednesday to see through Russia's obvious ploy to divide Ukraine's allies. Ottawa should instead broker a solution that does not involve waiving sanctions, she wrote in the letter. Any waiver of Canadian sanctions would be viewed as capitulation to Russian blackmail and energy terrorism and would serve only to embolden the Russian terrorist state, she said. In an interview, UCC CEO Igor Michalchilskin said the group is acting independently and not receiving direction from Kyiv regarding lobbying about the turbine. Well, perhaps they're not receiving direction because they don't need it, because their motto is the Ukraine first. And just a reminder that the Ukrainians in Canada come overwhelmingly from a time when there was no Ukraine. Before the First World War, of course, they were cut off. Those who came to Canada were cut off for 100 years, close to 100 years. The Ukraine, it's a rather strange attachment, I have to say. And also another reminder that it is the Ukrainian community in Canada that is responsible for the blight that is official multiculturalism because of peak. Because they felt that they had been mistreated after they were welcomed to Canada. People for some decades made fun of the way they dressed and the way they spoke. The Ukrainians flourished in my country, but they remained spiteful regarding it. Let's go to moonofalabama.org, which recommends a speech Michael Hudson gave a Monday. The issue is debt, which historically was largely forgiven by the king or high priest in case of hard times. But during the time of the Greek and later Roman empires, oligarchs took over and demanded to pay back all debt in full, and even in hard times. This split societies into a rich rentier class and indebted plebs. Each empire followed that path from the Roman to the British one, and eventually came down due to over-indebtedness. The website Naked Capitalism is the first to publish the English language version of Hudson's speech. The core paragraphs are probably these. The United States, through its new Cold War, is aiming at securing precisely such economic tribute from other countries. The coming conflict may last for perhaps 20 years and will determine what kind of political and economic system the world will have. At issue is more than just a U.S. hegemony and its dollarized control of international finance and money creation. Politically, at issue is the idea of democracy that has become a euphemism for an aggressive financial oligarchy seeking to impose itself globally by predatory financial, economic, and political control backed by military force. As I have sought to emphasize, oligarchic control of government has been the distinguishing feature of Western civilization since classical antiquity. And the key to this control has been opposition to strong government, that is, civil government strong enough to prevent a creditor oligarchy from emerging and monopolizing control of land and wealth, making itself into a hereditary aristocracy, a rentier class living off land rents, interest, and monopoly privileges that reduce the population at large to austerity. And the website concludes it will be necessary to bring down this rentier class, to recommit to a strong state that owns the public goods and services and does not hand them over to private interests. The coming malaise may well help to achieve that. From the same site, no, Iran will not deliver armed drones to Russia. In March this year, we were treated to an onslaught of obviously false claims that China would deliver weapons to Russia for the fight in Ukraine. From the Washington Post, March 13th, Russia seeks military equipment and aid from China, U.S. officials say. And Jake Sullivan said, we are communicating directly, privately to Beijing that there will absolutely be consequences for large-scale sanctions, evasion efforts, or support to Russia to backfill them. Oh, this is why the Biden administration is removing all of Trump's tariffs against China. removing an organization to prevent a Chinese infiltration in the United States. It's Confucian institutes and the like in universities. Yes, that's because the Biden administration is so tough on China. Russia is an exporter of military weapons, and China is one of its biggest customers. There is nothing in the Chinese arsenals that Russia cannot and does not produce itself. The claim was false from the get-go, but Sullivan, the mediocre national security advisor of the Biden regime, planted it to put pressure on China. It, of course, did not work. China denied that it had received any request from Russia or that it was in any way willing to ever fulfill one if it would come. No Chinese weapons have been seen in Ukraine. Now an equally stupid claim was launched by the very same liar who launched the fake Chinese weapons claim. Oh, but good news for the Ukraine is that it may be getting significantly woker. This is from Yahoo News. Zelensky has sent petition asking to legalize same-sex marriages. And there's a picture of a march for equality in Kyiv on September 20th of last year, with people holding signs saying love is a terrible thing to hate and being homophobic is so gay. Ooh, sick burn. The petition was registered on the president's website June 3rd. The required number of Ukrainians signed it by July the 9th. At this time, every day could be your last, wrote the author of the petition. Let people of the same sex get the opportunity to start a family. How would that work? And have an official document to prove it. They need the same rights as traditional couples. The likelihood of Ukraine going forward with the legalization of same-sex marriage has long been one of the main arguments among opponents of the ratification of the Istanbul Convention, although in fact these two aren't directly connected. Previously, several draft laws on civil partnership had already been prepared, but they were never registered. In November 2020 in Ukraine, a lesbian couple managed to use a mechanism to register a partnership that could be considered an alternative to marriage from a legal point of view. But as we've discovered in the West, it's never enough. Oh, no, just give us civil partnerships. That'll be enough. Nope, wasn't enough. Someone commented on this story. Petition with only 25,000 signatures out of a $40 million population is being reviewed by the president while the country is on the brink of collapse. Thousands are dying and the world may plunge into World War III. This just doesn't make any sense. Well, Alexander, spelled with a K, I guess he just doesn't quite understand what the Western world considers it to be its priorities. And well, why don't we take a first look at the chat here? And okay, hello to Oscar Toe, who says Moldbug High Elf has entered the chat. Hello, fellow elves. When did I start reading this fellow Moldbug? 15, 20 years ago. And I stopped reading him. I'll tell you why. I consider myself to be a fairly clever person, but I would read one of his interminable essays and then at the end think, what is he on about? I'm not striking a pose. I really have no idea what he is trying to say. Hello to Anrun and to Dawn from Beyond and to Pitsky, who claims to be checking in from hell. I hope things are not so bad as that. Hello to David the Gnome. And I can't get upset at Moldberg, says Oscar Toe. He's a silly fellow. Hello to Chokokin666. I was just in a chat, says Oscar Toe, where people were genuinely upset. Yarbin called them hobbits. Pitsky says, a question for me. Curious, any advice for a novice on how to pray? I don't know. I could suggest buying a prayer book. I mean, they're cheap. You can get them at any religious store. But I think that what's essential is to try and divorce yourself from thoughts of the outside world, all the distractions of the outside world. It's very difficult these days. And I know that a lot of people have the problem that they start to pray and their mind is racing through, all of the quotidian concerns. But if one keeps it up, one can learn to block it out. I hope that helps. Dawn from Beyond says, I'm in the edge of my seat every day watching KMG walk that treacherous YouTube tightrope. I look forward to Kevin changing to a friendlier platform. First episode, KMG Unleashed and Run. Ever the Skeptic says, if that day ever comes, Dawn from Beyond responds, I like to imagine it. Oscar Toe says Kevin could stream those here if he just privates them immediately after streaming and archiving them somewhere else. I know some people do that, but I have had streams like cut off in the middle, and struck. Hello to Quacholango, who says checking in from a deeper pit of hell, or adjacent rather. What song are we talking about here, Anrun? Listen to that song, not at all what I was expecting. Post-punk mixed with the Beastie Boys would have been better without that woman at the end. I'm kind of at a loss here. Hello to Throwaway Shill, a new name to me. Glad to see you here. Quacholango says doing chats and things and trying to get a boat running that I kind of inherited for non-payment of storage fees. Oh, you mean like the Hunter Biden laptop? Some say the lead singer reminded them of Mark E. Smith's voice. Okay. Perhaps someone could repeat what song we're talking about. Hello to Che Blutarsky, who said, if I want to read indecipherable drivel that puts me to sleep in 5 minutes, I read Curtis Yarvin. I don't, this cathedral, which is the big enemy. I really hate that metaphor because a cathedral is a beautiful thing. And what he is describing is a nasty thing. Hello to Hauper and David the Gnome. Okay. I didn't hear that, but I was never huge into The Fall, says Anrun. Nudge It by the Sleaford mods. Okay, there we go. Who else? The Anrun says the second non-singing guy was doing nothing on stage. Remember on Peep Show where Jeremy said that he was going to be like, he was going to go on stage with this electro band. He was going to be like Bez. And she says, I don't know who that is. And then she mentioned Flavor Flav. And he said, do you know Flavor Flav? No. Okay, I'm fresh out of ideas. Just a guy who, makes himself look stupid on stage and adds absolutely nothing at all to the music. John Vincent says, Kevin, I understand that you attend a Byzantine parish for Mass. Are they Ukrainians? Well, they were, a long time ago. It's not particularly well attended. And of course, a very suspicious incident, the house of the priest was burned, was destroyed a couple of months ago. Now, how anyone would know that this house next to the church was the priest's church, I don't know. And it raises the question of why they didn't burn the church instead. It's a suspicious incident that I've seen nothing about since it happened. Mork and Mindy. I didn't think that Amy Taylor woman had anything good or interesting to the song. Brian Frakes, hello, says Jake the Snake Sullivan. Hello to Philip Daniel, long time no see. Emmett Kelly's Earth, hello, says that Joe Biden's father almost assuredly said, love is love. Oscar Tosa's Swedish band Viagra Boys is strange stuff too. Was that called skanking? Mork and Mindy is also a Sleaford Mods song. Okay. All right. So now I'm going to talk. Let's look at Pedro Gonzalez's Twitter feed. Just give me a second here. And up it goes. Here we are. I see he's calling himself Barrio Nazi / Taco Fon Ribbentrop. We'll talk about this similar satire with regard to Matt Walsh later in the program. Patrick Deneen reviews Douglas Murray's latest book in Compact Mag. Murray's book is one more expression of a uniparty effort to distract from the real crisis facing the West, structural liberalism. I haven't read the review. It's structural liberalism. I mean, liberalism is dead or moribund. And you have these people like Douglas Murray saying, no, wait, look at us. We're liberals. We're still here. You can find us at Quillette, And yes, we believe in progress, but these people have gone too far. So you have to stop that runaway train. Not going to happen. Of course, Douglas Murray, despite not being a conservative, is constantly tone patrolling people on the right. GOP Senator Kevin Cramer says there's no limit to the amount of American money we must spend on Ukraine. Republicans like these would never say this about the border wall or, any project connected to the real American national interest. Gonzalez tweeted, secularization has not ushered in an era of enlightenment. It has made way for new gods and new cults that may yet make the secular weep. As René Girard put it, the modern process of stamping out religion produces countless caricatures of it. Once again, that was the point that John Gray makes in his book, 7 Kinds of Atheism. Basically, almost all of them are perverted versions of monotheism. Cream City Catholic had responded, Augustine describes man as one who by nature adores. If man doesn't adore God, he doesn't stop adoring. He simply transfers the adoration to idols, and subsequent cults form around them. Too true. Someone on the chat yesterday, the day before, was talking about a trip to England, to London. This is the Associated Press today. London's Heathrow Airport asked airlines to stop selling tickets for summer departures on Tuesday after it capped the number of passengers flying from the hub at 100,000 a day in an effort to quell travel chaos caused by soaring demand and staff shortages. Britain's busiest airport said Tuesday that it's setting a limit on 100,000 departing passengers that it can handle each day through September the 11th. The restriction is likely to result in more canceled flights, even after airlines already slashed thousands of flights from their summer schedules. UK aviation authorities demanded that airlines ensure they can operate without disruption over the summer, with carriers not punished for not using their valuable takeoff and landing slots. Even with that allowance, Heathrow, which had warned a day earlier that it may ask airlines to cut flights further, said it expected more passengers than airport ground staff could handle. And apparently this is a demand boom. And of course, there have never been years when many people were flying in the summer. There are still restrictions. There are still Corona Doom restrictions, for instance, coming to the United States or coming to Canada. Yes, I guess there was pent up demand, but no, I am not buying this. Heathrow has said it started a recruiting drive in November and expects security staffing to be back to pre-pandemic levels by the end of July. I wonder how many people they fired because they refused to get jabbed. It happens sometimes when you fire people in this manner that they decide that they don't want their old job back. This is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. The European Union has warned of a new wave of migration caused by a global food crisis exacerbated by the war in Ukraine. Ija Kalnaja, the newly appointed interim director, told reporters in Prague that the bloc was already prepared for refugees leaving Ukraine, but that the wider problem would likely be an influx of people from other areas of the world. We have to prepare also for refugees. Yes. Food security. You probably know that grain transport from Ukraine is hampered and that will create waves of migration. Her warning follows the release of a 27-page internal EU report last month, which highlighted the threat of a catastrophic famine facing North Africa. A global hunger crisis might trigger new waves of social protest, internal displacement, and migration to neighboring regions and possibly towards the EU. A similar warning was sent by Italian Lega Party leader Matteo Salvini, who back in May said that up to 20 million Africans could try to enter Europe if the disruption to grain supplies continues. So we've got the camp of the saints to look forward to. Now, the Canadian media has paid little attention to the disruptions in the Netherlands. I saw one CTV report. Oh, these farmers don't care about pollution. Yeah, that was their take on it. Is the Canadian government, are they planning anything similar? Don't look for our Canadian courtier media to pay any attention to that. But Kian Bext, who has a site called The Counter Signal, reports, much like in the Netherlands, Justin Trudeau is bringing in a nitrogen emissions cap that will absolutely decimate Canadian farming. Well, actually, decimate means to reduce by 1/10, and it would be much worse than that. In December 2020, the Trudeau government unveiled its new climate plan with a focus on reducing nitrous oxide emissions from fertilizer by 30% below 2020 levels by 2030. Fertilizers play a major role in the agricultural sector's success and have contributed to record harvests in the last decade. They have helped drive increases in Canadian crop yields, grain sales, and exports, a news release from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada reads. However, nitrous oxide emissions, particularly those associated with synthetic nitrogen fertilizer use, have also grown significantly. That is why the Government of Canada has set the National Fertilizer Emissions Reduction Target, which is part of the commitment to reduce total GHG emissions in Canada by 40 to 45% in 2030. Bext comments, this is a tacit admission that any attempt to lower emissions by reducing nitrogen fertilizer will consequently lower crop yields over the next decade, hurting the agriculture sector and, more important, hurting farmers. And indeed, according to a report from Fertilizer Canada, total emission reduction puts a cap on the total emissions allowable from fertilizer at 30% below 2020 levels. As the yield of Canadian crops is directly linked to proper fertilizer application, this creates a ceiling on Canadian agricultural productivity well below 2020 levels. It is estimated that the 30% absolute emission reduction for a farmer with 1,000 acres of canola and 1,000 acres of wheat stands to have their profit reduced by approximately $38,000 to $41,000 annually. In 2020, Western Canadian farmers planted approximately 20.8 million acres of canola. Using these values, cumulative farm revenues from canola could be reduced by $396 million to $441 million on an annual basis. Wheat farmers could experience a reduction of $400 million. Moreover, Fertilizer Canada doesn't believe that forcibly decreasing fertilizer use will even lower greenhouse gases, but could lead to carbon leakage elsewhere. Nonetheless, Trudeau's government is moving forward with the farmers' groups speaking to Farmers Forum, now wondering if he's intentionally trying to cause a food shortage, which Trudeau previously told Canadians to prepare for. Here's a quotation from Princess Rockstar. We've seen from the global pandemic to the war in Ukraine significant disruptions of supply chains around the world, which is resulting in higher prices for consumers and democracies like ours, and resulting in significant shortages and projected shortages of food and energy in places around the world. This is going to be a difficult time because of the war, because of the recovery from the pandemic, and Canadians will do what we always do. We'll be there for each other. Aw, isn't that sweet? No, they're not going to be there for each other. What was it, 2 years ago that Trudeau was musing on Quebecois TV about people who refused to get the jab and wondering how long these people could be tolerated? Meanwhile, there are millions of Canadians who were cajoled, bullied, terrorized into getting the jabs. You won't have a job if you don't, and you'll also be ostracized from society. This is not the sort of thing that builds unity. On April the 1st, the same day he gave himself a raise, Trudeau decided to go ahead and jack up the carbon tax by an additional 25%, consequently increasing the price of practically everything. As Alberta MP Shannon Stubbs wrote at the time in an article for the Counter Signal, the Liberal government is hiking the tax on everything carbon tax while Canadians struggle like never before with skyrocketing prices for essentials like food and fuel, heating and housing. Of course, the Liberals claim the carbon tax is revenue neutral. Whether for governments or for Canadians, that's just not true. The independent, nonpartisan parliamentary budget officer calculates the GST collected on carbon taxes at more than $200 million each year, which goes straight into government coffers. Years ago, Conservatives tried to end this tax on a tax, but the Liberals wouldn't budge. Since boosting the carbon tax, gas prices have soared to over $2 per litre across Canada, with one Liberal candidate saying that the silver lining is that Canadians will be priced out of driving. Just a reminder, there are approximately 3.5 liters in a gallon. And yes, this is Ontario Liberal candidate Granville Anderson said the silver lining of astronomical gas prices is that people will be priced out of driving gas-powered vehicles. Yes, and of course, we know that everyone should simply switch to electric cars because although they're very expensive, we know that they're powered by lightning strikes. So, they don't involve carbon in any way or anything that will, hurt Mommy Earth. And yes, sometimes wickedness and stupidity are punished. This is from Hannah Ellis Peterson at The Guardian. Sri Lankan president Gotabaya Rajapaksa flees the country. Rajapaksa and his wife boarded a special Air Force flight bound for the Maldives, local officials said. I thought that they were stopping him from leaving the airport. Well, wait. The 73-year-old leader, his wife, and a bodyguard were among 4 passengers on board an Antonov 32. That's a Russian plane. Sri Lankan military aircraft, which took off from Colombo's International Airport Tuesday, immigration officials told Agence France Presse. Their passports were stamped and they boarded the special Air Force flight. An immigration official involved in the process said there was no immediate confirmation Rajapaksa had reached the Maldives. Airport officials said the aircraft was held up for over an hour on the tarmac without being able to take off following confusion over permission to land in the Maldives. That must have been a difficult hour for Rajapaksa. Officials said immigration staff prevented the president from going to the VIP area of the airport to stamp his passport, and he would not go through the ordinary queues for fear of being mobbed by the public. As a result, Rajapaksa reportedly missed 4 flights to the United Arab Emirates, and he, his wife, and a dozen other family members and close aides spent the night at a nearby military base. Rajapaksa, who lived in the U.S. for years and has a son and grandchild there, because of course he does, gave up his dual U.S. citizenship in order to run for president, which means he is now ineligible for a visitor visa. While he is still president, Rajapaksa enjoys immunity from arrest. It is believed he sought to go abroad before stepping down to avoid the possibility of being detained. He is accused of overseeing corruption and economic mismanagement. Oh, you're going to leave out? You're going to leave out the green fiasco, Guardian? Yes, you are. Completely absent from the story. Why am I not surprised? Here's another story from The Guardian. This is from Leyland Secho in Toronto. Vancouver wants its beloved beach logs back, but officials are wary. At the height of the coronavirus panic, as major global cities shut down, the bustling streets of Vancouver went quiet. Businesses shuttered malls were empty, and hundreds of the logs used for decades as seating on the city's beaches were banished to a log jail. Soviet Kanakistan. Neat lines of driftwood have been a fixture along the shores that fringe much of Vancouver, but an ongoing battle over the fate of the beloved beach logs has raised broader questions over access to public space. Placed deliberately by city staff, the logs, a mix of hemlock, cedar, and fir, are a vestige of the city's past when, in 1963, architect Cornelia Oberlander watched in horror as city workers burned logs that had washed ashore from a boom. She lobbied the Parks Commissioner for a bold experiment in landscape architecture, converting the flotsam into public seating. I've always just assumed that people had logs on their beaches everywhere because they're such an intuitive feature. They provide seating, a bit of shade, and people like a space to mark out where they're spending the day, says Michelle Sika, a Vancouver-based writer who recently penned a love letter to the logs. Beaches that don't have them, in a way, seem featureless. In April 2020, however, city crews began using heavy machinery to remove the logs, acting under the assumption that seating encouraged crowding and gathering. So what was going on in April 2020 in Vancouver? Corona doom panic. And is The Guardian going to mention that in its story? No, it is not. I've been on the beaches, Vancouver, many, many times, and people love the logs, but they can't have them anymore. And I see that British Columbia's chief latrine walla, Dr. Bonnie Henry, has been explicitly blamed for this, because you can't have logs on the beach because people will sit next to each other on the beach, outdoors, with the wind blowing off the ocean. Meanwhile, in America, according to the Wall Street Journal, Heather Haddon, Starbucks said Monday it is closing 16 U.S. stores after workers reported incidents related to drug use and other disruptions in cafes. Now, if I told you that Starbucks was closing 16 stores because of disruptions in cafes, where would you think that these stores would be located? Well, you'd probably be wrong. Single locations in Philadelphia and Washington, 2 in Portland, and 6 each in Seattle and Los Angeles. This is the homeless / Antifa crowd that we're talking about. The company said it received reports from workers about incidents that they said involved drug use by some customers and in some cases members of the public. In certain locations, Starbucks said it would transfer employees to other locations when it permanently closes the store. This has come up at Starbucks before when they closed washrooms because of people shooting up, and the company was accused of, wait for it, racism. And California wants more people. It wants more and more and more and more people, despite the fact that most of it, overwhelmingly, is desert or semi-desert. And they're running out of water. You know what else they're going to be running out of? Gas. This is from Grace Toohey at the Los Angeles Times. Without realizing they were starting a movement in green energy policy, leaders of a small Sonoma County city seem to have done just that when they questioned the approval process for a new gas station, eventually halting its development and others in the future. We didn't know what we were doing, actually, said Petaluma Councilwoman Delinda, that's D''Lynda Fisher, who led the charge last year to prohibit new gas stations in the city of 60,000. We didn't know we were the first in the world when we banned gas stations. Since Petaluma's decision, 4 other cities in the Bay Area have followed suit, and now leaders in California's most car-centric metropolis are hoping to bring that climate-conscious policy to Southern California. It opens a new front in California's efforts to reduce carbon emissions and already is generating opposition from the fuel industry. Boo! Fuel? Why do we need fuel? We have the sun. Isn't that enough? The fuel industry argues consumers would suffer. It's really up to cities to turn around climate change, said Andy Schrader, Director of Environmental Affairs for Los Angeles City Councilman Paul Koretz, who proposed LA work towards its own ban on new gas stations. While the motion hasn't gained traction, Schrader and other council leaders expect a hearing on the matter this summer. LA's enormous and damaging ecological footprint really helped to set us on this path. These are the very same people who want more and more and more people to come to Los Angeles from Mexico and Central America. And they will come from places, particularly Central America, where their carbon footprint is small. And then they come to LA and it becomes much, much larger. Well, I don't know. Chacun a sa bêtise, as they say. They're determined to dig their graves in California. I don't think there's anything that anyone can do about it. It's a one-party state. Democrats are going to win forever. Here's a piece by Daniel Greenfield at Front Page Mag. The end of private car ownership. You will drive nothing and you will be happy. The term pedestrian has a derogatory meaning because peasants walked while nobles were equestrians and rode horses. The Industrial Revolution eliminated this class difference, as it did so many others, by making car ownership available to the masses, until eventually Herbert Hoover was able to boast that Republican prosperity has reduced and increased earning capacity to put the proverbial chicken in every pot and a car in every backyard to boot. Democrats have spent 2 generations trying to get those cars out of every backyard. President Biden is trying to bring back Obama's mileage standards that were estimated to raise car prices by 20%. The goal is to nudge 40% of U.S. drivers into electric vehicles by the decade's end. That's a little more than 7 years from now. Will 40% of Americans be able to afford electric cars that will cost an average of $54,000 by 2030? Not likely, nor are they meant to. Biden's radical green government, which includes Tracy Stone Manning, the former spokeswoman for an eco-terrorist group as the head of Bureau of Land Management, isn't looking to nudge drivers into another type of car, but out of cars. Gas prices are a way to price Americans out of car ownership under the guise of pushing electric vehicles. Biden's Energy Secretary, Jennifer Granholm, responded to American concerns about high gas prices by urging them to buy electric cars. Granholm, who had promoted a green energy tycoon who spent years in prison for fraud, who had served on the board of directors of an electric battery company and made millions divesting stock in an electric vehicle manufacturer, is a fan. Most electric vehicles are now cheaper to own than gas-powered cars from the day you drive them off the lot, Granholm tweeted. That isn't actually true, but actual cars have become more expensive to own, largely because of efforts by the Biden administration and by various states, including California. That hasn't, however, made electric cars any more affordable for ordinary Americans. The average price of an electric car shot up to $54,000 in May. Car prices in general have risen in the Biden economy, but electric cars are naturally expensive. The raw material costs for an average electric car are up to over $8,000. That's compared to $3,600 for an actual car. When your raw material costs are that high, electric cars will be inherently unaffordable. The Obama administration pumped billions in taxpayer money into battery and electric car manufacturing, the majority of which failed on the theory that enough government subsidies would lower battery costs. Not only was much of that money lost, but currently electric battery costs hover around the 160 kilowatt an hour mark. Green boosters cheer that's far down from the 1,004 kilowatt hour mark a decade ago, but that still adds up to the reality that an electric car capable of traveling for even short distances needs a battery that alone costs thousands. The Nissan Leaf, which approaches $30,000 once the reality of MSRP in the current sales market is taken into account, is one of the cheapest electric cars around and has a range of only 149 miles. Replacing its battery can set you back $6,500 to $7,500. And that's even when you can manage to find one or someone willing to replace it. In less than 3 years, Leafs lose 20 miles of range. By the 5th year, they have lost 30 miles, and it's all downhill from there. The Nissan Leaf was initially a hit, but car manufacturers quickly realized that anyone willing to overpay that much for substandard performance had money to burn. The electric car market is now dominated thoroughly by luxury vehicles subsidized by taxpayers, and the Leaf went from 90% market share to less than 10%. The EV market is now a taxpayer-funded status symbol. The dirty truth about the so-called clean car market is that it consists of traditional car companies and Tesla frantically trying to unload a limited share of luxury electric cars on wealthy customers to cash in on the emissions credits mandated by states like California. Tesla makes more money reselling these regulatory credits to actual car companies than it does selling cars. Taxpayers and working class car owners pick up the bill for the entire luxury electric vehicle market, a market they are shut out of from by design. The green vision is not a world in which everyone has their own electric car. It's one of collective transport of buses, light rail, and carpooling through shared rides and roving self-driving cars. The only vehicle the average consumer is supposed to own is a bicycle. Let's hear from Brock Porter at G2 Venture Partners. The days of the single occupancy car are numbered. Dan Ammann, the former president of GM, claimed that the human-driven gasoline-powered single-passenger car is the fundamental problem in a post titled "We Need to Move Beyond the Car." He has since gone to work for Exxon Mobil. Predictions are cheap, but car bans are expensive and all too real. The European Union voted to back a ban on the sale of non-electric cars by 2035. California is also pushing for a similar 2035 ban on the sale of new actual cars in the state. Officials noted that the ban would push more than half of mechanics out of work and leave much of the state unable to afford cars. Canada has its own 2035 car ban. Last year, Governor Newsom and Governor Cuomo, along with 10 other governors, urged Biden to impose a 2035 car ban on all Americans. Well, you could see what's going on here. As more and more people switch to electric cars, the grid is not going to be able to accommodate them. So the cars will be shut down. They're all going to have kill switches in them, so the government can decide, well, the grid's looking a little wonky here, so guess what? You're not going to be able to drive for a while. I mean, we'll let you know. Maybe we'll send you a text. Electric cars aren't actually cleaner. The mining processes that produce green technologies are as dirty, if not dirtier, and trade dependence on oil for dependence on rare earth metals and dependence on the Middle East for dependence on communist China. The one thing they decisively accomplish is to make it impossible for ordinary Americans to own cars. And that is what environmentalists really want, but not just them. Again, this is a piece by Daniel Greenfield at frontpagemag.com. Let's go back to the chat. Hello to Ruslan Akhmatov, who said, today I ran into a Mideastern guy who was excited that war with Russia would break out and that Russia would retaliate furiously. Yeah, a little overexcited, perhaps. A little system analyst who says, I want a steam vehicle just for laughs. The grid could decide for us. Yes. Maybe now would be the perfect time for Kramer and Newman's rickshaw idea, says Ann Run. Yeah. That's maybe not a joke. Maybe not a joke. Electric bikes. Oh, yeah. You've heard me moan about this again. I'm going to moan about it again. When was it? Was it last Friday that walking on Douglas Street, I was nearly knocked down 3 times by bicycles within about a 3-block walk. And for some reason, these people all seem to have mountain bikes, although the electric bikes are there as well. And the rascals or motorized scooters or whatever you want to call it. I'm sure some of the people who use them are genuinely disabled. But from what I have noticed and people that I've known who use them, they are overwhelmingly fat people who disdain walking. Buy this expensive item, we'll supply the fuel for, says Hauper. I'm going to make a depresso now, says Jokakin 666. Do you know who tests cars with electronic components? Buyers, says J Boss. The keyword is vehicle, says System Analyst. You won't have one, you'll be taking a bus. Hello to GC Style. Hello, Kevin in chat. He says, I hope everyone is well. Pouring aerosol straight into his mouth on the subway, says Ruslan Akhmatov. You see the guy who was beaten his wife pistol whipped over his Rolex in LA? That's from Oscar Toe. Yes, I did see that story. I don't know why anyone would wear an actual Rolex, in such conditions. Of course, a lot of these thieves are really stupid, and, you might have a fake Rolex, which you can get for a few $100s, but a lot of these people would pistol whip you anyway. Emma Kelly-Zer says, when will we reach Herbert Stein's prophesied stopping point? Well, the accelerationists seem to be in government now, right? The Canadian government, the American government, the British government, the German government, the European Union. Well, the World Economic Forum is not technically in government, although many of its most prominent members are. Hello to Tim Humphreys. Enron says, I was under the impression that Starbucks coffee is, well, I'll just say no good. Whit Stillman, the filmmaker, who I'm very fond of, he said, I don't know how true this is, but he said one of the reasons that he returned from Europe, many years in Europe, was because of Dunkin' Donuts coffee. They're just called Dunkins now. He said he could not stand that he described bitter, overbrewed Starbucks style coffee. I'm not a coffee drinker, so I'm in no position to judge. And pretty cold here in Queensland, says Tim Humphreys. Okay, let's get back to it here. Tell me why what I'm going to describe to you is not a criminal conspiracy subject to RICO sanctions, okay? This is from Emily Heil and Tim Carman at the Washington Post. Mortons and others brace as activists offer cash for Scottish sightings. Oh, I like this snobby way that it begins. In a city where the hottest new restaurants feature globe-trotting flavors, creative cocktails, and menus that change with the seasons, the Washington location of Morton's the Steakhouse feels like a relic. Its lobster bisque and porterhouse chops recall a time when the nation's capital was still thought of as a steakhouse town. I mean, can you imagine? No designer cocktails. Have you seen these designer cocktails? I have. A lot of them look like, well, sick, as the English call it. But the downtown location of the national chain is suddenly finding itself relevant, though probably not as it might have liked. As the first known DC restaurant dragged into the protests over the Supreme Court's reversal of Roe v. Wade. Days after a handful of people gathered outside to protest Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh, who was dining inside and left via a side door to avoid the crowd, the steakhouse is feeling the heat. Oh, did you see what I did there? A Morton's corporate executive warned managers around the country to prepare for a massive wave of negative response, according to a report by Politico, as well as callers tying up the phone lines and people making fake reservations. The Post cannot independently verify the memo reportedly sent to managers by Scott Crane, the company's senior VP and a CEO. Yes, bounties. Okay. Shutdown DC organized the Morton's protest last week. The activist group RuthSentUs.com received a tip that Kavanaugh was dining at Morton's, and Shutdown DC activated its network. The first protester arrived at Morton's within 35 minutes of receiving the tip, according to a Shutdown DC source who exchanged messages with the Post on the condition of anonymity because of the ongoing tensions around Roe v. Wade. Like Morton's, the group is likely to be inundated with bogus messages. Fox News host and leading conservative commentator Tucker Carlson urged his viewers to flood them with reported sightings until they give up. The group vowed to press on, though. Honey, DC could literally be underwater, and we'd still be out here organizing for a better world. Shutdown DC tweeted, "We're not the giving up type." Again, explain to me why this is not a criminal conspiracy which should be subject to RICO. Let me know what you think. And, well, yes. Sanctions. Sometimes the bad guys are sanctioned, and sometimes the bad guys say, we have a lot of lawyers, and we have a big endowment. So go pound sand. Pound sand. And how big an endowment does Oberlin College have? Well, let's just check. Its motto is learning and labor. Not much learning and not much labor, I'd say. Well, their endowment is $1.1 billion, which will buy a lot of lawyers. This is from Andrea Cavalier and Natasha Anderson at the Daily Mail. A woke Ohio college now faces paying $4 million in interest on top of $36 million in damages to a family-run bakery it almost destroyed with false racism allegations. Oberlin College was last month told it must pay the additional fee, equivalent of around $4,000 per day, for each of the 1,000 days it has refused to pony up to Gibson's Bakery. Oberlin College, led by one of its disgraced ex-deans, Meredith Raimondo, lied that the bakery staff had racially profiled 3 black students in 2016, despite the trio later admitting shoplifting. That sparked a boycott and protest led by a bullhorn-waving Raimondo that almost destroyed Gibson's, who successfully won a defamation payout in 2019. But Oberlin has refused to pay up and asked for another stay in paying the Gibsons what they're owed because of a pending appeal against the ruling against them. That appeal is set to be heard by the Ohio Supreme Court after 2 lower courts rejected Oberlin's attempts to slither out of paying the Gibsons. Lawyers for the Gibson family say Oberlin failed to file the correct paperwork to justify their latest delaying tactic and must pay up. The Gibson family, who owns the 137-year-old bakery, won damages after a jury found they suffered horrific stress as a result of Oberlin's lies and involvement in the boycotting of the business. And there's a picture of former Dean of Students and Vice President Meredith Raimondo, and she looks absolutely deranged. The bakery in Oberlin, Ohio, has struggled to survive and had to slash half its staff earlier this year after the 2016 incident. They did so after the Gibsons called the cops on 3 black shoplifters who stole wine and attacked a staff member and who were later convicted. Yes. Oberlin College got an appeal bond through Zurich American Insurance Company, the Chronicle reported. This ensures the judgment can be paid if their appeals are unsuccessful. After the appeal was decided and the college took the case to the Ohio Supreme Court, the Gibsons reversed course, filing a motion with the trial court not against Oberlin, but against Zurich to collect under the surety bond to try to moot this appeal. And here's a picture of the 3 young scholars who shoplifted from the bakery and attacked an employee and then attempted to destroy the business. Because, of course, black people, by definition, cannot be guilty of crimes because of the systemic racism of the U.S. justice system. I remember reading in A.N. Wilson's biography of the great Hilaire Belloc, he was talking about Belloc's involvement in satirical novels, satirical journalism, which G.K. Chesterton was involved in as well. And there's a tradition there that goes from Belloc and Chesterton to, say, Private Eye magazine, which has been around since the 1960s. And Wilson wondered whether all of this muckraking is not, in fact, counterproductive. Because if one is constantly pointing to scandals in governments, scandals in business, scandals everywhere, that there seems to be a temptation for people just to shrug or throw up their hands and say, what are you going to do? You know what? The whole world is rotten to the core, and it's just depressing to think about it. So I won't. This is by Joshua Young at Human Events. On Monday's episode of Human Events Daily, host Jack Posobiec commented on the Hunter Biden 4chan leak and said the story of the leak is probably the biggest part of it right now. The leak came from a New Zealand tech guy that had got a copy of the hard drive itself, found this backup on it, and then uploaded it to 4chan. The New Zealander cracked Hunter's backup iCloud and released his contents onto the internet in a series of scandalous leaks from Hunter's laptop from hell. In the past, establishment media had worked to suppress revelations about Hunter Biden, something Posobiec has commented on in detail. The new development that guarantees establishment media will never be able to shut this thing down is the fact that Hunter's data has been made into torrents. When the leak first went up on 4chan, moderators were trying to take it all down, but other users were throwing the info up in Pastebin and a few other sites. The most significant news storage method of Hunter's data is through torrents, which are a version of peer-to-peer sharing. P2P was popularized and standardized in 1999 with the invention of Napster and has existed in many forms since. Often platforms using P2P sharing are taken down because of digital privacy complaints. Unlike information found through search engines that could be stored remotely through a server, torrents create as many redundancies of the information as possible through each download. The files are stored in all the individual computers of the users who download the torrent, and torrenting links to and from those sites. So everybody who's got a copy of the file on their personal computer, their personal hard drive, or their cloud, however they have set it up, they can then be sharing it out. Yeah, I wonder about that. I mean, given just the hints of what we've seen, or at least of what I have seen of what's on Hunter Biden's laptops, it seems to me there could be a danger to people who download these torrents because, well, to give one example, they could be accused of storing child pornography. Of course, you know, Hunter Biden, he's the most blackmailable a man in the world, and his father is the president of the United States, and he worked with his father vis-a-vis Ukraine and China, but once again, not a story. Why would anyone care about that? Let's talk about treason, and I don't use that word lightly. This is a YouTube video which I came across just recently. It was posted November the 14th of last year. This is Canada's Minister of National Defence, Anita Anand, on her message for Transgender Awareness Week 2021. Anita Anand was appointed Minister of Defence for Canada in order to destroy the last vestiges of masculinity in that outfit. And she hasn't come right out and said it, but it's pretty clear. So let's go from the top here. My name is Anita Anand, Minister of National Defence. My pronouns are she and her. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are gathered on the unceded and traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe peoples. Okay. This is treasonous. What she is saying is there's no such thing as Canadian sovereignty because various Indian bands, and there are over 700 of them in Canada, they own every square inch of Canada. So in effect, there is no Canada. This is a Canadian cabinet minister, the Minister of Defense, no less, saying this. This nonsense has become de rigueur at practically every public meeting in Canada now. Oh, yes, we gratefully acknowledge that this is actually your territory. Oh, this happens in all Victorian meetings. Oh, really? If such and such an Indian band owns it, why don't they just, claim City Hall? Why don't they claim all the parks? Why don't they claim everything that the city of Victoria supposedly owns, or the government of British Columbia, for that matter? The people who make these statements, I think they, this is pro forma, but eventually a judge is going to take them up on it. You and you and you and you and you, all in positions of authority, have said this is not Canadian land. This is Indian land. and they're going to begin to act on it. Oh, every year we mark Transgender Awareness Week. Do we? From November 13th to 19th. This is an opportunity to raise the visibility of transgender people. Oh, were they particularly invisible before then? Not my understanding. And address issues that members of the community face. And on November 20th, the Transgender Day of Remembrance, we honor members of the trans community who were murdered in acts of bigotry and anti-trans violence. Oh, just the word of the wise. If you are a sex worker, and you are advising yourself, or you putting it out there, advertising yourself as a biological woman, and you're not, it often happens that when it gets to the moment of truth, as you might say, the John or Trick or whatever you call him becomes enraged, and violence ensues. So, as I say, a word to the wise. But no, all the right people in Canada believe that Canada doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. It's all owned by Indian bands. Notwithstanding the fact that Canada is entirely a European foundation. Entirely. How much in the tank is the Canadian media for Princess Rockstar? Well, here's a story by Bill Graveland of the Canadian Press. Happy Stampede, Prime Minister mobbed by admirers at Stampede pancake breakfast. And there's a picture here. And it's Justin Trudeau. And he's got on a Stetson. And he's wearing jeans and a check shirt. And he's got a big belt buckle. And there's a bunch of horses next to him. That didn't happen this year. They used a several years old photo to illustrate this. Why is this important? Well, let's have some of the typical drooling, part of the psychosexual frenzy that Justin Trudeau raises in the members of Canada's MSN, both female and male. Inch by inch, step by step, it could be the lyrics to a country and western song featured at the Calgary Stampede, but in reality, it was the progress Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was making Sunday as he attended a pancake breakfast in Calgary. The annual 10-day celebration of the cowboy way of life has become an irresistible magnet for politicians of all political stripes. Trudeau is no exception and has made an appearance year after year, except he missed 2 years. This is a moment to gather and celebrate being able to gather once again. It's great to see everyone in person. Happy Stampede, said Trudeau, who was attending a breakfast hosted by his lone Liberal MP in Calgary, George Shahal. Trudeau briefly referenced the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and global events before spending some time flipping pancakes. Except that he wasn't at the Stampede. He wasn't at the Stampede, and he wasn't mobbed by Calgarians. They made it all up. This is Corey Morgan at the Western Standard. Legacy media outlets are falling over themselves for Trudeau. The liberal bias in Canada's legacy media outlets is hardly new or surprising. What does one expect when the government dangles hundreds of millions of tax dollars in front of them, much like a person holds a piece of bacon to make a dog sit up and beg? Mainstream media is in full Trudeau cheerleading mode this week, as most of Canada's aspiring politicians do their annual pilgrimage at the Calgary Stampede. It's the one time of the year when Albertans can feel loved by their federal political masters. The other 51 weeks, not so much. The Globe and Mail outdid itself with a headline saying Trudeau mobbed by admirers at Stampede pancake breakfast. The image depicted a maniacally grinning Trudeau gloriously indulging in selfies with fawning admirers at an event. But wait, the Winnipeg Press had the exact same headline. Why, so did the Lethbridge Herald. Oh, and Canadian Press or CP24. There were other outlets as well, but I think I've made my point. Can they at least make a token effort to do a little work? The reason Trudeau was surrounded by admirers is the event was staged. Nobody, aside from a small group directly in touch with his lone Calgary MP, George Shahal, even knew he was coming. People were quietly bussed to this event, which took place in a parking lot, not on Stampede grounds, and instructed to crowd around Trudeau for the pictures. Now, the other news outlets quietly, without acknowledging it, changed their headline and removed "mobbed by admirers." National News Watch, which is kind of like the Canadian Drudge Report, did not change their headline, and it's still up. And I looked for it today, and I was really rather shocked because this story has been busted. But National News Watch is a semi-official government entity. One might say Liberal Party entity. And okay, how far did politicians want to go over the corona doom? Well, I guess some information is leaking out. This is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. This is according to Cabinet Minister Nadine Dorries. Potential next British Prime Minister Jeremy Hunt wanted the government to kidnap COVID-positive children from private homes and separate them from their parents in quarantine isolation facilities. I suspect many felt the same. And let's take a look at Alex Berenson's Substack. This is a post, how anti-COVID vaxxers will save the world from Donald Trump and Joe Biden. At this point, Joe Biden is a walking corpse, politically, maybe medically too. Diagnosis at a distance is always tricky. The Democrats are begging him to promise he won't run again. It's only a matter of time before his approval rating falls into the 20s. He is the most ineffective president since at least Herbert Hoover. Yet the same New York Times poll that puts his approval rating at 33% shows him winning a potential 2024 race against Donald Trump. How about that? Berenson advises the clearest path out of this mess is for the Republican Party to reject Donald Trump and pick someone else, anyone else, to represent it. Yes, the presidential election is more than 2 years off, but at this point, it looks like any other Republican would wipe the floor with Biden and probably anyone else the Democrats nominate. Trump's biggest fans hate the COVID vaccines. They hate them more than anything else, more than mail-in ballots or inflation or even abortion, and they hate abortion. I don't know. My hatred is kind of shared out equally. The mRNA jabs, the mail-in ballots, the inflation, and abortion. So, this problem is only getting worse for Trump as the uselessness of the vaccines becomes more and more obvious. Already, he is afraid to say vaccine in public. But even Trump, a master at avoiding responsibility, cannot dodge the fact that he and his administration are responsible for the mRNA vaccines. Even worse for Trump is the fact that Ron DeSantis, his most powerful challenger, has taken a very different stance. Ultimately, the vaccines will prove Trump's kryptonite. His base hates them more than they love him. Finally, some good out of the mRNAs. Let's take a look at the Daily Skeptic. The unrest in Sri Lanka has been exaggerated, according to Omar Khan. Well, golly, that mob, when the mob overruns the presidential palace, that doesn't seem like much of an exaggeration to me. Again, more on this story. Michael Curzon, Boris Johnson loyalist Nadine Dorries, appears to have admitted that the government, which now prides itself on having imposed restrictions more lightly than others, considered tearing mothers and fathers and families of children from their homes if they tested positive for COVID during lockdowns to be sent to isolation centers. The now Culture Secretary told Dan Wooten, who decided not to dig deeper into the claims. I went to the Daily Mail a couple of hours ago. Nothing about this story. Jeremy said, you've got to speak to Matt Hancock. It was at the time Nightingale hospitals were being built. Do you remember the Nightingale hospitals? They weren't used because they were unnecessary. You've got to tell them that you don't put sick people in the hospitals. You follow a zero COVID policy. When someone tests positive, you take them from their home and you take them to an isolation center and you leave them there. Dorries said she responded, the British public will not stand for mothers and fathers and families and children being removed from their family and their home and put in isolation. He said, who said they won't? I said, the Behavior and Insights team, who I've discussed this with, they won't wear it. Britain is still importing oil directly from Russia, reports Noah Carl. It's just that Russian oil is mixed with oil from Kazakhstan. Inflation is rising in almost every EU country, with Estonia now logging a rate of 22%. In Russia, meanwhile, inflation fell by 1 percentage point in the month of June, and Russians are used to rising prices. Inflation there is the highest since 2015. Inflation in Germany, by contrast, is the highest since the 1970s. This morning, the euro reached parity with the dollar, having declined 12% since the start of the year. But that's not the only exchange rate shifting against Europe's interest. As the chart below indicates, the euro is also way down against the ruble. Before the Russian invasion, 1 euro was worth 85 rubles. It's now worth less than 60s. Were we told that the exact opposite was going to happen? Will Jones reports, lockdown will return to protect the NHS if hospitals come under pressure, government says. They're still pushing this line. Protect the NHS. The NHS is the most expensive thing in the British government, and it presumably exists to protect Britons, not the other way round. But it's funny, how this capture happens. We don't work for you, you work for us. And don't you ever forget it. This is from William Briggs, statistician to the stars, at his excellent blog at wmbriggs.com. Turns out the VEX likely caused myocarditis and pericarditis after all. Remember how the woke and super connected and awfully caring and most of all ignorant, I use this word in this technical sense, censors at YouTube, Twitter, and all the rest quashed accounts that said myocarditis was likely a prominent side effect of the mRNA jabs, which, as we'll see below, it surely was. Censoring the unwashed is their natural inclination, yet that happy duty was strengthened by experts in the bureaucracy whose policy was the noble lie. Yes, the L word. For do you also remember when CDC Director Rachel Walensky, a physician, announced in her most serious voice, vaccinated people don't carry the virus, don't get sick. And here she is. This is new from her. My message is simple. It is essential that these Americans get their second booster shot right away, because the first 3 shots and the 4th shot, they worked so well. Never forget that Rachel Walensky, when she was appointed head of the CDC, a few months ago, she almost burst into tears at a press conference and averred how scared she was. These are the sort of people who get the top jobs these days. Briggs comments, there are only 2 explanations. Either she is incompetent, which in our crumbling culture is a live possibility, or she was lying, which I believe, the noble lie. Get your vex or starve, peasant. No vex, no job, no questions. You will be safe. One reason for the vociferousness of the lies was because of the hatred the elite have for us. They saw the reluctance on our part, which they took for disobedience. They cannot bear disobedience, so they insisted on the lie long past the point where the lie was plausible. They still insist, or rather they still do here in the once United States. The CDC is requiring foreigners to be fully vexed before they allow them in the country, and that would include me. And so I have had offers from Americans for accommodation. 2 problems with that. One, Canadians are only, without a green card, are only allowed to stay 180 consecutive days in the United States, and then they have to leave. That's it for a year. Also, I would not even be allowed into the United States, even for a short visit. Unless the CDC accepts those who wish to come here illegally, yes, no problem about the jab for them. They don't have to be vexed. In the science for this policy, the CDC still do not recognize naturally acquired immunity. Prior infection counts for nothing. Another lie. And this is a tweet by David Zweig. And hang on, I just want to see how it is. He's the author of Invisibles, Forthcoming in Abundance of Caution. I write about tech and culture, science, and other stuff for The Atlantic, New York Magazine, Wired, New York Times. And what does he have to say? Study in the New England Journal of Medicine, prior COVID infection conferred better protection against symptomatic Omicron more than a year after infection than 3 doses of vaccine, greater than 1 month after the 3rd dose booster. Back to myocarditis and pericarditis. Enter the peer-reviewed Nature Communications report, age and sex-specific risk of myocarditis and pericarditis following COVID-19 messenger RNA vaccines. They analyzed all 1,612 cases of myocarditis and 1,613 cases of pericarditis that occurred in France in the period from May 12, 2021 to October 31st, 2021. Can't do that here in the States, mostly because the data isn't available except in spots. And if it was available, it wouldn't be available, if you understand me. Summer and into the fall of 2021 wasn't only the start of the Vexmania period for the non-elderly, which lasted well into this year. Keep in mind that this is only 5 months of data then, with the bulk still to come. They looked at doses of Pfizer and Moderna Vexes, who got them by age and sex, and case matched these to people who did not get the Vex, and looked at myocarditis and pericarditis. They found adjusted odds ratios of myocarditis of 8.1 and a 95% confidence interval, and 30 for the Moderna vaccine at a 95% confidence interval to develop either of these known side effects. Just the largest associations are observed for myocarditis following the Moderna vaccination in persons aged 18 to 24 years, just exactly as we non-elite have been warning. Yes, but let's not talk about that. But some of us don't have to worry about myocarditis and pericarditis because we're purebloods. I don't blame anyone who got vaccinated. I mean, I remember the bullying, terrorization. I don't have a job that I can be fired from, so I don't have to worry about that. Let's go back to Joseph Tainter's The Collapse of Complex Societies. 4 concepts lead to understanding collapse. The first 3 of which are the underpinnings of the 4th. These are: 1, human societies are problem-solving organizations. 2, socio-political systems require energy for their maintenance. 3, increased complexity carries with it increased cost per capita. And 4, investment in socio-political complexity as a problem-solving response often reaches a point of declining marginal returns. This process has been illustrated for recent history in such areas as agriculture and resource production, information processing, socio-political control and specialization, and overall economic productivity. In each of these spheres, it has been shown that industrial societies are experiencing declining marginal returns for increased expenditures. The reasons for this are summarized below. To the extent that information allows, rationally acting human populations first make use of sources of nutrition, energy, and raw materials that are easiest to acquire, extract, process, and distribute. When such resources are no longer sufficient, exploitation shifts to ones that are costlier to acquire, extract, process, and distribute, while yielding no higher returns. Information processing costs tend to increase over time as a more complex society requires ever more specialized, highly trained personnel who must be educated at greater cost. Since the benefits of specialized training are always in part attributable to the generalized training that must precede it, more technical instruction will automatically yield a declining marginal return. Research and development move from generalized knowledge that is widely applicable and obtained at little cost to specialized topics that are more narrowly useful and more difficult to resolve and are resolved only at great cost. Modern medicine presents a clear example of this problem. Socio-political organizations constantly encounter problems that require increased investment merely to preserve the status quo. This investment comes in such forms as increasing size of bureaucracies, increasing specialization of bureaucracies, cumulative organizational solutions, increasing costs of legitimizing activities, and increasing costs of internal control and external defense. All these must be borne by levying greater costs on the support population, often to no increased advantage. As the number and costliness of organizational investments increases, the proportion of a society's budget available for investment in future economic growth must decline. Thus, while initial investment by a society in growing complexity may be a rational solution to perceived needs, that happy state of affairs cannot last. As the least costly extractive economic information processing and organizational solutions are progressively exhausted, any further need for increased complexity must be met by more costly responses. As the cost of organizational solutions grows, the point is reached at which continued investment in complexity does not give a proportionate yield and the marginal returns begin to decline. The added benefits per unit of investment start to drop. Even greater increments of investment yield even smaller increments of return. A society that has reached this point cannot simply rest on its accomplishments, that is, attempt to maintain its marginal return at the status quo without further deterioration. Complexity is a problem-solving strategy. The problems with which the universe can confront any society are, for practical purposes, infinite in number and endless in variety. As stresses necessarily arise, new organizational and economic solutions must be developed, typically at increasing cost and declining marginal return. The marginal return on investment in complexity accordingly deteriorates, at first gradually, then with accelerated force. At this point, a complex society reaches the phase where it becomes increasingly vulnerable to collapse. Two general factors can make such a society liable to collapse. First, as the marginal return on investment in complexity declines, a society invests ever more heavily in a strategy that yields proportionately less. Excess productive capacity and accumulated surpluses may be allocated to current operating needs. When major stress surges, major adversities arise, there is little or no reserve with which they may be countered. Stress surges must be dealt out of the current operating budget. This often proves ineffectual. Where it does not, the society may be economically weakened and made more vulnerable to the next crisis. As in the COVID-19 panic following the Russian invasion of Ukraine panic. Once a complex society enters the stage of declining marginal returns, collapse becomes a mathematical likelihood, requiring little more than sufficient passage of time to make probable an insurmountable calamity. So if Rome had not been toppled by Germanic tribes, it would have been later by Arabs or Mongols or Turks. A calamity that proves disastrous to an older established society might have been survivable when the marginal return on investment in complexity was growing. Rome, again an excellent example, was thus able to withstand major military disasters during the Hannibalic War, late 3rd century BC, but was grievously weakened by losses that were comparatively less in regard to the size and wealth of the Roman state at these respective times at the Battle of Hadrianople in 378 AD. Similarly, the disastrous barbarian invasions of the first decade of the 5th century were actually smaller than those defeated by Claudius and Probius in the late 3rd century. Secondly, declining marginal returns make complexity an overall less attractive strategy, so that parts of a society perceive increasing advantage to a policy of separation or disintegration. When the marginal cost of investment in complexity becomes noticeably too high, various segments increase passive or active resistance or overtly attempt to break away. The insurrections of the Bagudae in the late Roman Gaul are a case in point. At some point along the declining portion of a marginal return curve, a society reaches a state where the benefits available for a level of investment are no higher than those available for some lower level. Complexity at such a point is decidedly disadvantageous, and the society is in serious danger of collapse from decomposition or external threat. And I'll have more from Joseph Tainer's The Collapse of Complex Societies tomorrow. I'm going to talk about Matt Walsh shortly. Before I do, I wanted to get this in. I was talking about the Toronto Blue Jays yesterday, I believe, that they stink and that they seem to have forgotten how to win. And, or it struck me that they don't really care that much anymore. There's a site about the Blue Jays called Blue Bird Banter, which is, quite useful, except that Toronto Blue Jays fans are the wokest, perhaps the most annoying ones in Major League Baseball. And someone reacting to a post came to the same, rather a similar conclusion to the one that I had. There is something to this too much fun theory, or maybe it's about when to have fun and when to play with intensity. It's good that they're loose, but I think there's a line that they cross. Right now, of all the teams in the American League who are in wild card or better position in the standings, they have the most runs scored against and the worst run differential. It's a long season still, and there's time to right the ship. I just hope they remember what it was like to miss out by one game last year. And yes, fun. Yes, till your daddy takes the T-bird away. And other people notice this idea of fun and are not all that happy with the way that the Jays handle themselves on the field and in the dugout. Someone commented, "There's always the Yankees." Seriously, those of you who can't handle losing a few games should probably just switch teams. The Yankees always make the playoffs and are serious, clean-shaven players who don't do fun. Oh. And guess what this became a discussion of? Racism. Yep, racism. Because if you point out that too much goofing around is not good, you get accused of racism. Here is the particular comment that led to the R card being played. From Deucey66, the dugout watching is good, but I can't shake the feeling the Jays players are having too much fun. It seems like it is costing them some professionalism, focus, and preparation. It also means they are not prepared for stressful moments when things are more serious. Montoyo, that's the manager, has a habit of breaking bullpens. Last year, he relied upon some mid-season imports, and this team should be taking a team approach to hitting, grinding down pitchers through long at-bats, but instead like to swing at the first fastball they see, regardless of location, in a time when a lot of fastballs are nearly unhittable and are being thrown less than ever. Maybe I am in the minority, but I won't believe in this team until they grow up with a new manager. Holy Gamoli responded, "Agree entirely. The lack of any apparent plate discipline makes one wonder what the coaches of these players are doing, or whether the players are in charge and just ignoring the coaching. Either way, the hitting isn't getting better anytime soon with the amount of total garbage they swing at." Ratinator responded, "This is a hilarious comment. I don't think he's laughing. They are professional baseball players with a winning record. If you think they are not putting their utmost to prepare and get better at their craft every day, then you've truly not been watching the same sport. And what the heck is too much fun? They are big kids playing games for our entertainment." Oh, and how many millions of dollars a year are they paid for playing these games? Stop old man yelling at clouds for a minute and let them enjoy the fact that they get play sports for a living and revel in their culture enthusiasm of doing well in what they do, but they're not doing well. Also, comments like this low-key show just how weirdly deep racism is still ingrained. Your comments regarding dugout watching and noticing too much fun are surely targeted towards the young Latin or Black kids who are just enjoying themselves playing a sport. But the Empire-style New York Yankees with their short hair and no beards, who look like they're from the 50s, boo, are surely more grown up and hence winning as a result. Move on from this narrative of fun is only allowed when winning. Another response. Well said, although I'm reluctant to play the racist accusation card. I hate the Yankees' hair policy and 50s ethos. There's no proof that leads to winning baseball. It could just lead as easily to misery and resentment towards management for what is really a human rights violation that has zero to do with on-field performance and may contravene state and city law. Did a woman write this comment? D.D. Drizzy responded, "Oh, dear God, everyone I disagree with is a racist. Please log off. The adults are talking." So cultural expectations equal racism? Thanks for enlightening me. Yes, using one's own cultural expectations and standards to discriminate and judge another's, aka why won't they let a group of Latin players at the end of the dugout laugh less and scowl more? Maybe then they'd win. Could be considered low-key enraged racism. Doesn't mean anyone needs to get sensitive at the idea of that. Everyone has their unconscious or unconscious biases. I wasn't trying to enlighten or teach you anything either, so much as pushing back at you, calling the other poster a child who claims everyone disagreeing with them is a racist. Yeah. Oh, so you're one of those people who believes in playing the game the right way. Yeah, I am one of those people who believes in playing the game the right way. But we'll see how long that lasts in Major League Baseball. Matt Walsh is a political commentator, born in 1986. According to Wiki, he hosts the Matt Walsh Show podcast and is a columnist for the Daily Wire. He has authored 4 books and starred in the Daily Wire documentary, What is a Woman? And he has a new fan, perhaps a surprising one. This is from The Daily Dot. Produced by the conservative news site The Daily Wire, the documentary What is a Woman is best known for creating controversy. Pitched as a film about gender identity, it's not a film about gender identity. This is from someone called Gavia Baker Whitelaw. Its host, narrator Matt Walsh, is notoriously transphobic and was accused of using a fake company to trick trans people into participating under false pretenses. Released to coincide with Pride Month, an obvious piece of anti-alphabet people trolling, What is a Woman was ultimately too niche to receive mainstream reviews. Oh, ultimately too niche, like blue is the warmest color? Like that movie? I could name many others. Like that Midsummer movie from Sweden? Too niche to receive mainstream reviews, because mainstream movie reviewers never review niche movies. Never, ever, 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 ever. They only review movies that, make at least $500 million at the box office. Then on Sunday, J.K. Rowling complimented the movie on Twitter. Bizarrely, this crossover between Rowling and a far-right troll began with a controversy involving Macy Gray. Quotating Matt Walsh to her 13.9 million followers, Rowling wrote, "Women who stand up on this issue receive endless death and rape threats. The issue in question is trans rights," with Rowling saying that cis women face harassment if they push back against trans women identifying as women. In the quoted tweet, Walsh had written, "Women who publicly renounce the definition of woman for fear of mean comments from trans activists deserve all the scorn they get." So I searched this on DuckDuckGo. I just put, Matt Walsh, J.K. Rowling. The first 3 hits that came up were Daily Dot, some homosexual shrieking in anger, outrage. And then next up was the Washington Blade, which is a magazine for homosexuals. And the next one was from The Advocate, which is a magazine for homosexuals. I don't think I want to use DuckDuckGo for search anymore. Transphobic interaction between J.K. Rowling and Matt Walsh enraged Twitter users. They were literally shaking with fear. This is by someone called Tian Rui Huang. J.K. Rowling continues getting herself involved in the gender-related debate. That's the best subhead that you could come up with? Oh, let's take it right from the story. J.K. Rowling continues getting herself involved in the gender-related debate. Wow, that's a really punchy lead there. Her interactions with right-wing commentator Matt Walsh were critically condemned by Twitter users. Last week, American singer Macy Gray appeared on British TV show Piers Morgan Uncensored and made controversial comments on transgender women. She first defined women as a human being with boobs and a vagina, but further stated, and I will say this, and everyone's going to hate me, but as a woman, just because you go change your parts doesn't make you a woman. Sorry. Gray afterwards apologized for her comments on the NBC's Today show. Conservative commentator Matt Walsh described Gray's latest statement as gutless cowardice. On the next day, Rowling chimed in the discussion and criticized Walsh's posts against Gray. These people who are called TERFs are regularly threatened with physical violence, rape, and death regularly. But apparently they just, it's mentioned at the very end of this story from the Washington Blade. J.K. Rowling has long been known for trans exclusionary radical feminist, or TERF, perspectives. Okay. I went onto Twitter and it's just absolutely hilarious. Just absolutely hilarious. And I'm just so pleased to see that J.K. Rowling is doubling down on this. She's worth about $1 billion, which is truly FY money. And I'm just so tired of these people who genuinely have FY money. Oh, no, I have to apologize. You have $1 billion. I mean, you could literally build a fortress for yourself. You could hire a private army to defend you. I was speaking about treason earlier on in the live stream. Well, here's one of the many, many examples that comes from Britain. This is Jessica Warren for the Daily Mail. More than 1,000 children were raped and sexually exploited over 30 years in Telford, where police and council officials ignored abuse over fears investigating Asian men would, quote, inflame racial tensions, unquote. An inquiry has concluded. It found that children were brainwashed by men using a lover boy method to reel them in as they operated a rape house in Wellington. A public inquiry was launched by Telford and Wrekin Council after a Sunday Mirror investigation in 2018 concluded that around 1,000 children could have been sexually exploited in the Shropshire town over a 30-year period. The report, published today, makes 47 recommendations for improvement among the involved agencies, after its chairman, Tom Crowther, QC, concluded that the abuse had gone unchecked for decades. West Mercia Police has apologized to children who were sexually exploited in Telford over the past 30 years, saying their actions fell far short of the help and protection you should have had from us, with Telford and Wrekin Council also apologizing. Speaking on behalf of the force, Assistant Chief Constable Richard Cooper said, "I would like to say sorry. Sorry to the survivors and all those affected by child sexual exploitation in Telford. While there were no findings of corruption, our actions fell far short of the help and protection you should have had from us. It was unacceptable. We let you down." Let's get back to the racism. The men, alcohol and cigarettes, fast food, topping up their mobile phones, all in a bid to convince the girl they were in a loving relationship. Okay. They're going to really downplay this. About 25 paragraphs in, the report highlighted witness testimony suggesting Asian men were not targeted as part of the investigations because it would have been too politically incorrect. That's a quote. With one saying police were found to have dropped the case like a hot potato if such complaints were made. Enoch was right. It's proved every day. The report said in some cases, threats were reinforced by reference to the murder of Lucy Lowe, who died alongside her mother, sister, and unborn child in August 2000. Abusers would remind girls of what had happened to Lucy Lowe and would tell them that they would be next if they ever said anything. Every boy would mention it. In 2001, the then 26-year-old taxi driver, Azhar Ali Mahmoud, was handed 4 life sentences when he was jailed for the murders of Lucy Lowe, 16, Sarah Lowe, 17, and 49-year-old Eileen Linda Lowe in 2001. In 2020, the jealous and possessive Mahmoud had a bid to be freed from jail rejected. The inquiry, published today, reported that unnecessary suffering and even deaths of children might have been avoided had West Mercia Police done its most basic job in acting on reports of such crime. If you go to their Twitter feed, you'll find out that there's one form of crime that West Mercia Police is obsessed with, and that is Twitter messages. Mean Twitter messages. You're not going to get away with that. You know, if the West Mercia Police have anything to say about it. Again, priorities. Priorities. I was talking about Penny Mordaunt, who's a leadership challenger for the Conservative Party. And I guess I didn't know all that much about her. She had some things were revealed to me in the last week, things that she had said, trans men are men, trans women are women, that sort of thing. But it gets worse. This is from Gareth Roberts at Unheard. Charles Moore has dug up quite the quote from Tory leadership hopeful Penny Mordaunt today. In her 2021 book, Greater, Britain After the Storm, she reveals that she hates Dad's Army and the other sitcoms written by Jimmy Perry and David Croft. This sounds desperately trivial because it is, but Moore has really exposed Mordaunt's flank here, asking the British public to like you, more specifically, asking elderly Tory members if you hate Dad's Army is a bit like the cat bin woman hoping to be made CEO of the RSPCA. Hilariously, Mordaunt describes It Ain't Half Hot Mum as, quote, a full house bingo card of casual racism, homophobia, white privilege, colonialism, transphobia, bullying, misogyny, and sexual harassment, unquote. Yes, all those things are technically depicted, and mostly they come from one character, Sergeant Major Shut Up Williams. But there's no malice in It Ain't Half Hot Mum, and they're all depicted as bad things. Sergeant Major Williams is not the hero. He's the butt of almost every joke. The main wellspring of the humor comes from his utter lack of comprehension at the gleeful naughtiness and informality of the concert party. At the party is an amiable jumble of hopeless young men, including a drag queen and a boffin, as well as Indian and Burmese characters. The final episodes treat Williams as a pitiable figure, and tellingly, Muhammad, the Chawala, sets off for Britain to join his friends. Trying to map 21st century social justice ideology onto it is hilarious. Indeed it is. I know that these shows, particularly Dad's Army, are tremendously popular. Now, young people, and by young people, I would suspect that means anyone under the age of 40, have been warned strenuously to never watch these shows because you may be, I don't know, polluted irredeemably. But I know amongst the over 40s, certainly the over 50s, they remain quite popular. Roberts concludes, what Mordaunt is doing here is common among politicians desperate to display their progressive credentials, making a confident pronouncement of hate or love about some cultural artifact in the mistaken belief it will make you look hip. David Cameron's toe-curling profession of love of the Smiths, Gordon Brown's for the Arctic Monkeys, or Jeremy Corbyn pretending to watch EastEnders. Let us not forget how the drawn-out downfall of Boris Johnson began with Peppa Pig. Doesn't make them look like one of us. In Mordaunt's case, with her electorate both small and potentially very large, it could be suicidal. Bye-de-bye, Penny. So I'll talk about Peter Pan generation tomorrow. Also, Prince Harry. You know that he's a mental health champion? He works hard at it. Let's talk about the yesterday's episode of Better Call Saul, season 6, the final season, episode 8. We were forced to endure a 6-week break after, previous episode, and I was doing some reading into this, and apparently, it was done with Breaking Bad the last season. It was done with Mad Men the last season. Apparently, the studios do it because essentially they're getting 2 seasons for the price of 1. So they save money that way. Now, as a result of this, I have to say that last night's episode was something of a disappointment. Given that it was, the season opener, or effectively a season opener, one wouldn't have expected such a diminuendo, but that's what we've got. Now, again, I've complained in the past of the lack of, irrevocable events on Better Call Saul. Of course, one of the problems that it has is because it's a prequel, It means that certain people are not going to die. Saul Goodman is not going to die, and Mike is not going to die. And we know that Gus Fring is not going to die. So that rather narrows it down in terms of who is eligible for the death sentence. Complaint that I had, particular complaint that I had about the show is that episode is that it's rather preposterous. That the plot that we see in the show is so very elaborate. Well, it's not so much that it was so very elaborate. I mean, David Mamet's plots are quite elaborate, but there's no room for error. It's like a Mission Impossible plot. Everything has to work exactly, for anyone to believe it. And, I thought it was simply over the top in that respect. Now, I don't mean to give too much away for those who haven't seen it. Look, we knew what was going to happen to Howard Hamlin after the last episode. There's no way that Howard Hamlin's reputation could be saved. It wasn't going to happen. Our Saul or Jimmy, and Kim, are they going to make themselves sacrificial lambs to tell Albuquerque and the world what they did to Howard and how Howard met his end? I don't know. Not only would they be ruined and run out of town, they might be charged with, some sort of criminal conspiracy. So sadly, Howard is going to go down in the fictional world, fictional Albuquerque world, as a drug addict who went out of his mind and then killed himself. A typically arresting cold open to a Better Call Saul, where we see the waves pounding on a beach, and we see a shoe, and we know that it's a very fancy, expensive shoe. We know it has to be Howard's shoe, and then camera pulls back, and then we see his abandoned Jaguar with his vanity license plate, which says Namaste. I have to say that the final disposition of Howard was really quite clever, both in terms of script and visually, and also sad and moving as well. I'll certainly miss him as a character, no question about it. After the episode previous to last night's revealed just what an ugly, immoral, even sociopathic person Kim Wexler is, I must say that I enjoyed a certain degree, let's say a fair degree of schadenfreude over what she was put through in last night's episode. But again, from any practical or even sane point of view, it simply doesn't make any sense. And in terms of advancing the plot, well, we get something irrevocable that happens, but I suppose in the remaining episodes, we know what's going to happen to Jimmy. He's going to be the guy handing out the matchbook covers with his face on them, doing those ads, with bus boards and billboards everywhere. And he's going to be famous / infamous in Albuquerque as, not a criminal lawyer, but a criminal lawyer, as Jesse famously said. So I guess we're just going to have to wait and see what happens to Kim Wexler. Some, as usual, fine acting last night. from Rhea Seehorn, the actress who plays Kim. We have heard nothing of her. We know that that Jimmy, Saul ends up as Gene in Omaha, and when are they going to get to the fireworks factory? We haven't heard anything about her. There's been no clue about her from Gene in Omaha. Of course, that's where Kim Wexler is from, Omaha. So I don't know. Maybe they will meet up again. And it would be interesting to see. Well, she has a lot. She has done a lot of very, very bad things. She deserves to be punished for them, punished severely. How much she's going to be punished? Well, I guess we'll have to wait and find out. Let's have a final look at the chat. I'll scroll down to the bottom. Yes, when are they going to get to the fireworks factory? Yes, Millhouse. Millhouse speaks what's in our hearts. Oh, hello to Emma Nimpton, and thank you for your kind words. Better Call Saul was marred by sound dropping and choppy video. Thanks, Rogers. The music sound design in last night's episode, really, really good, but one expects that from any Vince Gilligan production. Do we have anything else here? Veggie sandwiches. Yeah. What's JJ? JJ Jersey? Okay. I don't eat vegetable sandwiches. Not much of a sub guy, says Don Willis. Too many carbs. A real Philly cheesesteak from a private source, but that's me. Those sandwiches are kind of troublesome to eat for the reason that you never get proper napkins anymore. You get a thin, very thin paper folded in four. Now you can, extend it to its full extent and you can tuck it in your chin. But I found just last week, I was eating, or 2 weeks ago, I was eating a cheeseburger at a pub restaurant, and I had the napkin on, but I had to lean forward. I had to lean forward rather intently because I don't want all this goo landing on my shirt and jacket. Hard to get back into it, says Gamma Yun. The Great Wall of Blu-rays. I dread, Jimmy John's. Yeah, I used to see their ads all the time. They're very fast, apparently. Fast. How they stay in business is beyond me, as Don Willis, but I'm not on a bicycle, skin tight, gay gear, and don't belong to a beard club. Oh, I don't know what that's referring to. Oh, okay. Got a chicken parm salad at Wendy's in a lunch pinch the other day, $7.99. Crazy, says Don Willis. Art Fong says New Zealand is going the co-governance way. Also present feeling is that we will see Jacinda Ardern. I always imagine that, when her vocal translator isn't switched on, her voice sounds like, because that's what her face looks like. Okay, you get less as toilet paper in Latin America, says Quachilango. Well, thanks for pointing that out. Subway used to sell 4-inch round sandwiches for 99 cents. So good. That's from Jason Bryan. And I'm going to wrap things up here. Thank you so much for tuning in. Greatly appreciated. As always, if you would like to make a donation to the live stream, my PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations may be made to the live stream directly via Interact at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And I leave you with this benediction in these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse. I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.